Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Finland's leaders raced to join NATO. And after years of public opposition, polling shows Finns have come to embrace this move. Finland is adjacent to Russia, and its addition doubles the alliance's Russian border. So, are there downsides? Emma Ashford thinks so. She's a senior fellow at the foreign affairs think tank Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., and she spoke to NPR's A. Martinez.
Emma, before we get into the cons of Finland joining NATO, what's a pro?
You know, the Finns have a long history of self-defense, resilience. They fought a war against Russia in the 1930s and into the 1940s for their own self-defense against the Soviet Union, and they kept that up through the Cold War. So the Finns, I think, bring a mindset to NATO that is very beneficial, and I think a lot of other European states could learn from.
So what should be the biggest concern then for the world for Finland joining NATO?
So the big problems are the same as they often are when the NATO alliance expands. Finland borders Russia. It adds, in fact, almost doubles the length of NATO's border with Russia, and that opens us up to sort of a new space in terms of, we're exposed to Russian attacks going forward. Adding another member to NATO also makes the alliance more unwieldy. This has always been the case as the alliance has grown in recent years. And finally, there's that risk of, burden sharing, right? As I said, the Finns have this long history of self-reliance, of self-defense. But what we've seen is many European states, as soon as they're admitted to NATO, move away from that and start to rely more and more on US capabilities. So, I think there's upsides to Finland joining NATO, but I do think there are those downsides we should be aware of.
Does this move allow Vladimir Putin to tell Russians, look, I was right. You see, NATO is trying to creep in on Russia?
I think that's always a concern. I am somewhat more concerned about the loss of states in Europe that have this sort of neutral mindset that can help to mediate between Russia and the West, that can help to act as a conduit between Russia and the West. And what we've seen with the war in Ukraine, this is entirely at the feet of Vladimir Putin. It is his fault that this is happening. But what we have seen is very much a hardening of that European environment into, Russia and everybody else. And there are very few countries left that can play that mediation role.
Now, we thought it was supposed to be Finland and Sweden joining NATO together, but Sweden's admission gets held up continuously by Turkey so far. So what effect will that have on defense in the region, to just have one of the two?
Yeah, it's not ideal. Finland and Sweden, in fact, have long had defense cooperation. Their militaries are very integrated. And so, it's going to, I would say, add technical challenges as NATO defense planners try and, bring Finland into all of the alliance's strategic planning and operational things, that they have to basically accept that Sweden is outside and Finland is inside for right now. Finnish leaders obviously felt that it was better to be inside the alliance and reduce that sort of risk of this limbo period, even if Sweden weren't there. But again, it's hardly an ideal circumstance.
What does Turkey have to gain by holding up Sweden?
Turkey has some serious policy disagreements, some with Finland, more so with Sweden, mostly related to the Kurdish question. And there's also some suspicion, I think, that Turkish President Erdogan is probably delaying his decision on this question until after Turkish elections in order to try and sort of bolster the notion at home that he is standing up to the West. So there's a possibility that after the elections he will change his mind on Sweden. But in general, there are these policy disagreements, and this again is one of these problems with expanding the alliance too far, is we end up in a place where members inside the alliance have serious policy security disagreement.
Really quick in the last few seconds we have here, is it a safer world with Finland in NATO?
I think we would all hope so. Certainly Finns believe so, that the number of people in Finland in favor of joining NATO has swung dramatically since the invasion of Ukraine last year. But again, I do worry. We have moved the NATO alliance right up to the border with Russia. We have expanded our nuclear umbrella that far, and there are these security risks that we need to bear in mind.
Finland yesterday became the 31st member of the military alliance, of which the most significant part is that an attack on any member will be responded to by all members. Sweden is also expected to become a member later this year. Both Finland and Sweden decided to apply for membership of NATO because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, an event which dramatically changed public opinion towards joining NATO in both countries. At a ceremony in Belgium yesterday, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that he was tempted to thank Russian President Vladimir Putin for making NATO bigger.
I'm tempted to say this is maybe the one thing we can thank Mr. Putin for, because he once again here has precipitated something he claims to want to prevent by Russia's aggression, causing many countries to believe that they have to do more to look out for their own defense and to make sure that they could deter possible Russian aggression going forward.
In Ukraine, Robert Habeck, Germany's vice-chancellor, visited Kiev yesterday. While talking to President Volodymyr Zelensky, Habeck apologized that Germany did not give weapons to Ukraine before Russia invaded last year, and said that he felt ashamed that Germany did not listen to Ukraine's calls for help before.
Germany was not able or willing to do that time. Now we changed our position, but it took too long and was too late. I know that. I think not all of the German politicians would say the same. But I feel deeply ashamed that it's all too late, and part of my job was in the last year to help delivering weapons as fast and as many as we could, and this is an ongoing promise.
Also in Ukraine, drones attacked the southern city of Odessa yesterday, with Ukraine saying it shot down 14 out of 17 Iranian-made drones. In the eastern city of Bakhmut, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner private military company, has said that his forces now control the city. However, Ukraine says that the situation in Bakhmut has not changed, with fighting continuing street by street. Ukraine confirmed yesterday that kickboxing world champion Vitaly Merenov was killed in fighting. In Bulgaria, votes have finished being counted from Sunday's presidential election. This was the fifth election in 2 years without a clear winner. The centre-right coalition of former Prime Minister Boyko Borisov gained the most seats, and the pro-Western reformist coalition came second. Coalition talks are expected to take a long time. In Montenegro, President Milo Đukanović has accepted defeat in Sunday's presidential election. Jakov Milatović of the new Europe Now party will become president next month. Milatović has promised to take Montenegro into the European Union within 5 years. Africa. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, at least 20 people have died in a landslide. The landslide happened at a river where people were washing clothes in North Kivu province. In Kenya, protests have been paused for talks between President William Ruto and opposition leader Raila Odinga. There have been major protests in Kenya for the last 2 weeks because of living costs and allegations of fraud in the 2022 election. Also in Kenya, the government has said that it will launch its first ever satellite next week. Kenya Space Agency said that the Taifa 1 satellite would be launched by SpaceX in the United States. Asia. In India, at least 7 people have died in an avalanche in the northern state of Sikkim. India's army said that it had rescued more than 20 people and that the victims were tourists. Pakistan's Supreme Court has said that provincial elections must be held in Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, affecting over half of Pakistan's population. Khadija Tahir reports.
The Supreme Court of Pakistan has declared that the decision of the Election Commission to delay provincial elections is unconstitutional. The elections of Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa provinces were scheduled to take place in April, but were delayed by the government because of security concerns and for financial reasons. The Supreme Court has now ordered the government to hold snap elections on the 14th of May. The decision was made following a petition filed by the main opposition, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, led by former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who dissolved his governments in Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
America's. In the United States, Donald Trump has become the first former president to be arrested on criminal charges. Trump pleaded not guilty to 34 charges of falsifying business records in connection with payments made to pornographic actress Stormy Daniels in 2016. In Argentina, the security minister for the province of Buenos Aires has been attacked during a protest. Sergio Berni suffered damage to his skull and jaw when he was beaten by a group of bus drivers who were demonstrating against the death of a bus driver on Monday who was killed during a shootout between criminals and police. And the barcode is 50 years old this week. Barcodes are the black lines of different sizes that are used to identify products in shops and other things. In April 1973, leaders from the shopping industry in the US agreed on the combination of lines that would generate 13 numbers, enough numbers to make 1,000 billion different number combinations. Thank you for listening to Send 7, and an extra big thank you to our supporters. You can become a supporter and have access to the transcripts of every episode at send7.org.
First, let's unravel what these charges mean for Donald Trump.
It's huge, isn't it? And if there was any doubt about that, you just have to look around you.
James Matthews is our US correspondent.
I'm sitting in New York. You look at the TV, endless panels of legal experts, political experts, squillions of viewpoints pouring out around something we've never seen before, a former president being indicted, charged, given the common criminal treatment when he is ushered in to this very austere Soviet-style building in Lower Manhattan, the Bowery area, which was the original Skid Row in New York. You know, it's harder to see how much further a former president could fall, but that is what confronts Donald Trump. He's a man who faces legal jeopardy on a number of fronts. It was the case many thought was the weakest and the least likely to nail him, but it's the first in the queue, and it relates to, of course, this one-night stand he had with a former porn star, Stormy Daniels. Hush money, the putting through the books of that particular payment that was seen as falsification of records. That's how the prosecutors see it, and they also think there was a breach of campaigns finance law. Technically, he's staring down the barrel of 4 years in jail, although that's probably not likely because he's a first-time non-violent offender. But, you know, in the political, legal context, unprecedented, historic, and huge attention around that courthouse in New York.
Now, James, his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, was jailed several years ago for his involvement in these hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Explain to us why it's taken so long for Donald Trump to be indicted over this.
The reason it's taken so long, Sally, is frankly he was in power. There is a Justice Department policy that a sitting president doesn't get indicted. Then really the delays were a matter of process, just working through the evidence and building a case. COVID didn't help. That caused a delay in the various investigations into Donald Trump. And there have been many of them. It's just that this particular case has risen to the top after, wide-ranging investigations. Cohen is interesting. Yes, he has served time in jail. He was the fixer. He was Trump's Mr. Fix-It, the man who went to Stormy Daniels when there was a fear in the Trump camp just before the 2016 election that she was going to tell her story. So he went to her, said, look, we don't want you going public with that story. It could be damaging for Donald Trump. We want to give you money. She said, grand. Well, in actual fact, she said 130 grand. That's how much she was paid for her silence. They went after Michael Cohen. He has done jail time. During his trial, he pointed the finger at Donald Trump. He said, look, okay, I paid the money, but it was Trump who directed me. And that is where we are at the moment. There's a credibility issue with Michael Cohen apart from anything else. He is a convicted felon.
If anyone knows where Donald Trump's skeletons are, James, certainly it will be Michael Cohen. And certainly we understand that he's already met with Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, a number of times. Explain why Alvin Bragg is being so widely discussed in this story as well.
Because he's the man who will prosecute Donald Trump. He's chief prosecutor, district attorney in Lower Manhattan. And as such, he is the target for Donald Trump's vitriol. The Trump playbook is attack, 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 and also try to delay legal proceedings against him. We've seen that time and again. And Alvin Bragg is the man at the center of all of this, is his target in chief. And it's caused difficulties. We've got Donald Trump on his social media platform and elsewhere calling Alvin Bragg an animal, a woke tyrant. Alvin Bragg has received death threats. There was white powder sent to the court building that he works from. He comes and goes from that building in Lower Manhattan with tight security. And, we see the Trump strategy that we've seen time and again, conflating a media strategy, frankly, with a legal fight. His lawyers are all across the American media pouring scorn on this. He's got his Republican colleagues calling it a political witch hunt, calling it the weaponization of the justice system. And, it appears to work for him, certainly in the immediate term. It stirs the Trump base. Look at his fundraising. Since his arrest, he's raised $5 million in funds. This case, when you look at the division and the arguments around it and the noise is off, it is a stress test for this country's institutions, legal and political. Will proper justice be seen to be served? Will this be seen to be politically biased? Will due process through the courts be something that can be influenced by the PR campaigns that pour scorn around it? There will be all sorts of arguments around the rule of law in this country arising from this. And they're being encouraged, don't forget, by Donald Trump himself and his incendiary comments, calling for people to protest, calling for people to take our nation back. And, this won't end anytime soon.
I was on Capitol Hill on January the 6th during that huge protest, riot, insurrection, whatever you want to call it, James. And for a lot of people, they're surprised that it's Stormy Daniels that's done it for Donald Trump. What's been the reaction in America to that?
It has somewhat come out of the blue because all the headlines around Donald Trump have been around the other cases, the other potential prosecutions that he is facing around Georgia, where he allegedly was involved in an attempt to overturn the result in that state of the 2020 election. There is the mishandling or alleged mishandling of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida. There is also his involvement around the January the 6th insurrection, big federal crimes related to overturning the government of the country, subverting democracy. So he is staring down the barrel of these other certainly significant cases, arguably more important. And the Stormy Daniels thing has rather come up on the inside. It wasn't the hot favourite for the biggest and possibly the first prosecution that Trump faces,
but it is the weakest. And I think generally there would be a view that if they can nail him on this one, then the rest will follow on pretty easily. If in a New York court.
Let's now turn our attention to the mood among those in the Republican Party at the moment following this news of Donald Trump's indictment.
It's divided, and it's been divided for quite some time, but the responses on either side have been extremely divided. So you have one side that is cheering and very excited about the indictment, and on the other side, you have disappointment, sadness, and disgust, quite honestly, with our justice system.
Amy Tarkanian is a Republican strategist and former chair of the Nevada Republican Party.
It will just be very interesting to see what the outcome will be. I don't anticipate there to be any violence, but I do anticipate there to be a groundswell of support for President Trump. I think this is going to catapult President Trump into the nomination, unfortunately. And I say that being a prior supporter of the president's. I was a delegate and I also voted for him twice. But I do think that this nation is tired. They are exhausted of everything that surrounds this president as far as chaos and the circus that is constantly going on surrounding him. And so, I know that people are also tired of President Biden. I think that the nation is ready for fresh faces. And, but I think once again, this is going to help President Donald Trump, and it's only going to further embolden his base.
Some Americans I've spoken to are surprised that it's been a payment to Stormy Daniels that has seen Donald Trump be criminally charged. What's your take on that?
It looks politically motivated. It smells politically motivated. Let's take January 6th, for example. Once that investigation is found, now you're going to have a good part of the nation kind of blow it off and say, yes, President Trump, I agree with you that it is in fact a witch hunt, and they're not going to take the justice system seriously. It's a sad day for America. You don't have to support Donald Trump to see that this is not going in the right direction.
Do you think Donald Trump is worried he's going to end up in jail?
I think he's probably worried whether he'll be president more than going to jail. But this is a very weak case.
Sarah Elliott is spokesperson for the political organisation Republicans Overseas UK. She too thinks the indictment is politically motivated.
It seems like they're trying to find the needle in the haystack to finally pin Trump down and put him in jail. But it's motivated by animosity and probably feel a bit threatened by his candidacy as well. America is, I think, very much over the Trump years, very much really want to move on. They want to see America in a better place. They're not happy with Joe Biden either. He is failing as a candidate. He's clearly too old for the job. And there's really a very short bench of candidates for the Democrats. And so what a better way than to bring up the Democrats' favorite enemy, arch nemesis and boogeyman, but Donald J. Trump, and make Republicans look like he's still the head of the party.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The picture that you paint, the Democrats bringing up their favorite enemy, Donald Trump. Because it actually has the opposite effect when it comes to the impact that has on Republicans. The MAGA movement adore Donald Trump, and this will only galvanize their support.
Absolutely, and it has. He's raised $5 million in 48 hours, a quarter of which are from new donors. This puts a lot of people who may not have voted for or may not have support him now for 2024, supported him in 2020, but are kind of ready to move on. But maybe it makes them rethink and go, you know what, this guy has been really bullied and harassed, and it's been unfair and unjust, and he needs to now win and just really show it to the Democrats. And so this may be a turning point where he gets more support that may have left him over January 6th. This might encourage him. I mean, his poll numbers have doubled also in the last couple days. I'm not sure it lasts. I'm not sure his lead continues as the campaign picks up steam.
Back to Amy now on just how this is playing out in the polls with American voters and whether this indictment could help or hinder Donald Trump's ambitions to return to the White House.
Oh, it's going to help him. In fact, if they do decide to release the mugshot, because in New York, they do not regularly release the mugshots, but if for some reason that is released, that will be his campaign poster. That will be on every campaign t-shirt, sweatshirt, email blast, and it will end up catapulting him into the nomination.
In effect, this could end up backfiring on the left as you see it. It makes Donald Trump a martyr, that the swamp is after him.
Massively, because in a primary, you have the party devoted that pay closer attention. Your average voter is more concerned about getting their children to school, putting food on the table. They don't pay attention to the details of an election until it gets closer to the general. President Biden is not this exceptional candidate either. And I know a number of those on the left are hoping to find a replacement. So, President Biden was lucky to become president. He's not somebody who people were looking towards, thinking that this was the new Barack Obama of hope and change. He happened to just be in the right place at the right time, and people were exhausted. It was a vote against Trump.
Do you see Donald Trump being back in the White House?
I honestly hope not. I would like to see somebody new, somebody who exudes strength, but has a better persona, somebody who exudes more of a statesman or a stateswoman, but yet can still get the job done and put forth the policies that our nation so desperately needs.
And back to Sarah now on how she thinks this could all play out.
I can see Donald Trump making the most of it and saying, look, I have to go back to defend myself in the witch hunt again. Here I go, wish me well, and don't forget to help my campaign and give $49 here. I think he will definitely live it up, but will Americans really want a president who, may go to jail? Do we really want to get behind somebody with, who just attracts this level of attention and scrutiny? It definitely, in the eyes of Republicans, elevates his image, makes him more sympathetic. They still see him as this pit bull in the ring, willing to fight for their freedoms and their liberties. It's a long way until Election Day, especially in politics. So I think it's hard to predict.
James, a final thought from you, if I may. We saw during Donald Trump's time in office that the usual rules just don't apply when it comes to Donald Trump. And many feel this indictment, the fact he now faces criminal charges, it could help him rather than hinder him in terms of his political capital. What's your take on that?
I think it will help him in the immediate term. I think we see evidence of that from the fundraising and from his performance in the opinion polls, actually. For all the talk about him being vulnerable to a challenge from Ron DeSantis, he's way out in front of DeSantis. And to all intents and purposes, he is looking like he will be the Republican nominee. His trouble will be beyond the Republican primaries in a presidential campaign. It's one thing being the outsider, the man taking on the establishment. We've seen how that chimes with his core support. But he was deserted and has been repeatedly at elections, presidential and midterms, by the independents, the swing voters, the voters who took a chance on him in 2016 but have since deserted him. I remember in the days when he was buying golf courses in Scotland, we were interviewing him at Aberdeen Airport, and it was the big sit down. He was surrounded by, his PR people, big Trump team, all clucking around him. And in the course of the interview, we had a young camera assistant with us, and he happened to close a door. So there was a slight clunk off camera, which, nobody heard except Donald Trump. He decided to stop the interview, shouted at this youngster, "Hey, guy," he said. And it was all very awkward. When you looked at his PR staff, you saw fear that things were not going right. But when you looked at Donald Trump, all I saw on his face was an enjoyment, a satisfaction. He was the man in charge. He was the man in control of all around him, whether he knew them, whether they were strangers or not. And I thought to myself that day, that's a man who needs control, who feeds off it. Right now, he's not in control. He is prey to the events that are all around him, that threaten him, threaten his political future, and may well lead him towards a jail sentence.